It is 1939. The pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee is the pride of Nazi Germany's Navy. Built to circumvent the Versailles Treaty, she combines a cruiser's mobility with a battleship's punch. In command of the Spee, Captain Sergei Hans Langsdorff, a capable graduate of the Kaiser's Navy. August 21st, 1939. The Graf Spee slips secretly out of Wilhelmshaven. Destination, the South Atlantic. War is imminent. The ship's orders read, be prepared to disrupt and destroy enemy shipping by all possible means. Heavily armored, equipped with 11-inch guns, the Spee carries 1,000 men, her own Arado seaplane, and can make 28 knots. Few warships in the world are her equal. With the help of a primitive radar, her orders are to avoid them. September 1st, war has begun. The disguised German supply ship Altmark rendezvous with the Spee. She bears the name Sonia and flies the Norwegian flag. The Graf Spee's position must be kept secret. She cannot go into any ports to refuel or pick up supplies. The Altmark's stores of food and fuel are vital to the mission of the big raider. As soon as she is supplied, the Graf Spee will head south, ready to raid. Even in wartime, the crossing of the equator means time out for the traditional King Neptune celebration.
Neptun, der Herr der Seen und Flüsse, der König aller Regengüsse. Euch sei's gesagt, ihr braven Schweine, wir kriegen euren Dreck schon reine. Wir wollen euch kämmen und rasieren, die alten Zähne rausbuxieren. Wenn's Schiff ist sauber und piekfein, muss rein auch die Besatzung sein.
September 30th, the Spee sights her first victim, the British merchant ship Clement, 75 miles off the South American coast. To hide her identity, Spee now bears the name of her sister ship, the Admiral Scheer. Clement flashes the alarm, believes her attacker to be the Admiral Scheer. Using the Scheer's call letters, Langsdorff radios Brazil to pick up the Clement's lifeboats. The British Admiralty reacts quickly to the Clement's sinking. 8 hunter groups are formed. Included among them are Commodore Henry Harwood's old 8-inch cruiser Exeter and the light 6-inch cruiser Ajax. To the Graf Spee, smoke on the horizon can now mean a hunter as well as a victim. A few days after the Clement, the alarm signals another target. Attack now becomes a deadly routine. Approach head-on, flying the French tricolor, then wheel at the last instant and run up the German ensign. October 7th, Ashley. October 8th, Newton Beach. October 17th, Huntsman. October 22nd, Trevanion. November 15th, Africa Shell. When survivors of the Africa Shell reveal Longsdorff's position in the Indian Ocean, he attempts to throw off his trackers by doubling back into the South Atlantic. In spite of Hitler's decision to torpedo without warning, Longsdorff not only warns the enemy before each attack, but has been taking prisoners as well. The Graf Spee is getting crowded. To mislead other ships further, the Spee is now disguised as a British man of war. After a coat of gray paint, a new dummy funnel, and a false gun turret have been added, Longsdorff is satisfied. He announces, "We shall look like the HMS Repulse." Her camouflage complete, Spee is again ready to strike. But days of monotonous patrolling go unrewarded. Everyone aboard, including Spee's 6 Chinese laundrymen, marks time with ordinary ship's routine. Finally, after 17 days, a distant silhouette, and Spee is back in business. December 2nd, Doric Star. December 3rd, Tarawa. December 7th, Stronshaw. The bag is growing, but Spee's day of reckoning lies ahead. Early December 1939, British Commodore Harwood, guided by the pattern of Spee's sinkings, moves Ajax, Exeter, and the New Zealand cruiser Achilles toward the Uruguayan coast. He suspects the raider is bound for the rich shipping lanes out of the River Plate, which feeds Montevideo and Buenos Aires. The Commodore knows that if the raider is a pocket battleship, he is badly outgunned. Harwood's guess about Spee's destination is right. Longsdorff has set course for the River Plate. Dawn December 13th, the Graf Spee sights another victim. Longsdorff moves in for the kill. A closer look convinces him he has sighted a British cruiser and 2 destroyers, presumably guarding a convoy. An easy score for a pocket battleship. Too late, Longsdorff discovers his alarming mistake. All 3 ships are cruisers and faster than Spee. Friedrich Wilhelm Rosenach, gunnery officer aboard the Graf Spee, recalls that moment.
Captain Longsdorff didn't want any battle. It wasn't his job. On the River Plate, he wanted to attack and destroy a convoy. But after sighting the enemy warships, he could not avoid the fight because of his much slower speed.
The skipper of the British cruiser Exeter describes the scene that morning to CBS News correspondent Alexander Kendrick. Captain Frederick S. Bell.
On the morning of the 13th, when daylight came and it was perfectly clear, calm, maximum visibility, you could see for miles and miles and miles, there wasn't a thing in sight, nothing. And then we saw, away to port, we saw this smoke on the horizon. We thought it was a merchant ship. And so did Commodore Harwood. He thought the same. In fact, he started to make a signal to me, telling me to close the merchant ship and put my mails on board for South Africa. I didn't really think that we were going to have any luck that day at all. And I was lying on my bunk and reading a book. And the principal control officer buzzed my buzzer, which was a thing he'd never done before. He just merely called me down the voice pipe if he wanted me, and I knew it was an emergency. And he merely said, Captain, sir, I think the Admiral Scheer is on our port beam. So up I went, and there was this smoke which we had sighted. When I saw the Graf Spee, I said, well, that's it. We've had it. I'd always imagined in my mind that a pocket battleship against a very old 8-inch cruiser, there was only one result could possibly be. And I sort of said to myself, well, thank God, the sea's calm and the water's warm. One can always swim for a bit.
At 6:17 a.m., the Graf Spee opens fire. Gunnery officer on the Ajax was Lieutenant, now Rear Admiral, Desmond P. Dreyer.
I think Captain Lansdorf made one important mistake in not concentrating his fire more. He started, I think, firing at the Ajax, and then he appreciated that the Exeter was a larger ship and transferred to her. And then he divided his fire, one turret at the Exeter and one at the Ajax. And then he later put both turrets onto the Exeter. But if he'd concentrated on the Exeter, he might have put her out of action quite soon, and so avoided being hit by her. In fact, I think the Exeter scored several good hits, and with her 8-inch shell, these would have caused quite a lot of damage.
The Spey's gunnery officer, Rassenach.
In the beginning, he had good luck crippling the most dangerous enemy, the heavy cruiser Exeter, by shell wounds. Later on, we damaged the smaller cruisers too, but were badly hit ourselves by the concentrated fire of 3 ships. We had 36 casualties, but were still in fighting condition. He was very confident. At the beginning of the fight, he said, "We will eat them up," not knowing that there was a whole squadron against him.
She found she was up against something quite different to what she had imagined, because don't forget that while all this was happening to me, the Ajax and the Achilles were having quite a nice little time by themselves and getting quite a lot of hits on her.
We were hit twice in the Ajax. One 11-inch shell went through the mainmast and brought down the main topmast, and another 11-inch shell went into one of the 6-inch turrets and destroyed that, and also damaged another one with a splinter so that it was jammed. So the 2 of our 4 6-inch turrets were out of action. The Exeter was the one, of course, who suffered the most damage. She had 8 or 9 hits and was really completely disabled by the end of the action.
At 6:37 a.m., when the light is good, Ajax decides to send her spotter plane up to help direct fire. The pilot tells Alexander Kendrick what it was like. Edgar D.G. Lewin.
I think it was the first time that an aeroplane had been catapulted while the main armament of the ship was actually engaged. And the captain made it very clear to me that if I could get off, I was welcome, but he wasn't going to stop firing. And the launch was a bit exciting because the nearest guns, in fact, were only 6 feet away from the aircraft when we were catapulted, but we got off all right. We could see quite a lot of hits on the Spey. They weren't too obvious. One had to look very hard. They were just tiny little points of fire, which dotted out all over the Spey from time to time. And I tried to keep a running tally and reckoned there were between 50 and 60 of them. In fact, because the Spey was very heavily armored and we only had 6-inch shells, the majority of these bounced off back into the sea, but enough of them penetrated to do the damage. The battle rally was just ding-dong for over an hour while we were watching it. It ended in, from our place of vantage, in a rather comic manner, because both sides apparently concluded simultaneously that for some reason or another they'd had enough. And they both started making a great deal of smoke simultaneously, and they both turned right away from each other and steamed at full speed away from each other for quite some time. Then Spey steadied down and appeared to be steering towards the South American coast. And Ajax and Achilles turned round to follow her just outside the range of the Spey's main armament.
On the advice of his navigating officer, Langsdorff puts into Montevideo, Uruguay. He has surveyed the damage, has concluded his ship is not seaworthy. At 50 minutes past midnight, Spey is at anchor. One adversary, Exeter, badly hurt, withdraws to the Falkland Islands. Achilles and Ajax are patrolling the harbor entrance. In the morning, the full extent of Spey's damage is tallied. Her galley is a complete wreck. Her conning tower and airplane badly damaged. most searchlights useless, and worst of all, she has at least 6 leaks below the waterline. Longsdorff learns that the repairs will take 2 weeks. He also knows that under international law, a belligerent warship in a neutral port can be interned after 24 hours. The crowd on shore is more curious than sympathetic. The German ambassador will call the retreat to Montevideo instead of friendlier Buenos Aires a mistake. Spey's 57 wounded and her British prisoners are taken ashore. Also coming ashore to ask more time for repairs is Longsdorff in the center. Shipyard workers say we won't work for Hitler, but Longsdorff gets an additional 72 hours from Uruguay's foreign minister, Dr. Alberto Guani, at Wright. To make the Germans believe in our motto, await Spey, British Minister Eugene Millington Drake first demands immediate departure or internment. Then he changes tactics, delay, keep the Spey in port until reinforcements arrive.
Early the next day, I was told to do anything I could for her to stay in, to keep her in. It was rather difficult. I went to the foreign minister, Dr. Guani, who was an old friend of mine, and when I handed him a note to say that a British merchantman was sailing at 18 o'clock that evening, so that by international law the Graf Spey could not sail for 24 hours, you can imagine that he raised an eyebrow and said, surely this is a considerable change. And I had to admit that it was. Let me explain that there is a cat and mouse rule by the Hague Convention. If a warship of one side is in a harbor and a merchantman of the other is in that harbor and sails, the warship is not allowed to go for another 24 hours.
On December 15th, barges bring the Graf Spey's dead ashore for burial. 37 of her officers and men have been killed in the battle. Captain Longsdorff accompanies the cortege. Although the British losses, too, have been severe, some of Longsdorff's former British prisoners attend the German funeral. As others raise their arms in the Nazi salute, Longsdorff pointedly touches his cap in the old naval salute. By December 16th, the false British rumors have so deceived Longsdorff, he radios Berlin that a blockade awaits him and that it includes the carrier Ark Royal and the battle cruiser Renown. He asks, shall he fight his way through to Buenos Aires, scuttle, or be interned? Meanwhile, British Minister Millington Drake continues his diplomatic maneuvering.
On the Saturday, the third day, I went again, after several other interviews, to say that a merchantman was sailing that night. And once again, Dr. Guani looked at me with a quizzical smile and said, yes, yes. And then he was humorous at first, but then he burst out, became quite serious. And he said, but don't you sail another ship. That's all right, but we want to get rid of the Graf Spey as soon as we can. And if you sail another ship tomorrow, that will give her the excuse for staying another 24 hours. And I was obliged to say, in view that he'd been helpful, that we would take note of his request.
December 17th, Guani refuses to extend the time limit, and the German High Command radios Longsdorff no internment. He will have to fight his way through or scuttle. At 2 in the afternoon, the German merchant ship Tacoma pulls alongside. For 2 hours, boatloads of sailors are taken off the Spey. At 5:10 p.m., the Spey weighs anchor and heads toward the open sea. The gathering crowd wonders, will she fight her way through with a skeleton crew? Among the observers, Millington Drake.
I went to the 18th floor of the only skyscraper in Montevideo in those days, and we saw her majestically going out on this calm evening, and she moved out, and the psychological moment was when she got to the buoy where the ships turn westward to Buenos Aires, whether she'd go that way or the other way. And she did turn westward towards Buenos Aires, but went very little way and then hove to. And then we all began to wonder what was going to happen. And there was a break of about 20 minutes. At 54, there was a very small explosion which sounded like a gun when the sound reached us. A moment later, there was this huge explosion, and the thing was on fire from stem to stern in a very short moment. And, well, like this vast crowd of 300,000 people were watching this from every conceivable vantage point, making a hell of a row, shouting, and the radios going full blast. The excitement was like a football match.
After a 20-hour trip up the River Plate, the crew of what Longsdorff now calls the sunken ship Graf Spee arrives in Buenos Aires. At first, both captain and crew are warmly received, but Longsdorff soon finds himself attacked as a coward in some of the local press for not having chosen to die with his ship. After failing to prevent his crew's internment, he assembles them and says goodbye. Sometime after midnight, in his room at the Naval Arsenal, Longsdorff wraps himself in a German flag, not the swastika of the Third Reich, but an ensign of the old Imperial German Navy, and shoots himself in the forehead. In a letter written before his suicide, he explains that he had postponed his death only until his responsibility to his crew had been fulfilled. 100,000 people attend his funeral. Racked by explosions, gutted by fire, the battleship Graf Spee settles slowly into the gray mud of the River Plate. Scuttled in waters too shallow for sinking, she will burn for days, brightening some of the darkest days in that first winter of the war. The British have accomplished their mission to get the Graf Spee.
In those early years of the war, Allied victories were rare. Successful resistance to the overwhelming Nazi onslaught a seldom occurrence. But on the Mediterranean island of Malta, an entire population wrote a proud chapter in bravery and determination.
In World War II, Malta is a British sentinel under siege, within close range of the vital Axis convoy routes through the central Mediterranean from Italy to the coast of North Africa. The battles in the Mediterranean hinge upon supplies. Malta is the key to this battle, and Malta is vulnerable. British convoys can supply Malta only from Alexandria or Gibraltar, each 1,000 miles away. Malta's survival depends on the twin elements of sea and air. But defense and supply of this beleaguered island fortress are no more essential than the courage of its people to withstand the incessant terror from the sky. A few British torpedo bombers are flown into Malta. They enter the battle. Their mission, to cut off Axis supply lines to North Africa. To win in North Africa, the enemy knows it must obliterate Malta. Under siege conditions, the usual tactic is to evacuate the women and children. But on this tiny island, there is no place for them to go. The devastation continues. The people endure. Most business premises are in ruins. Merchants construct open-air booths of rubble and tarpaulin. Churches, schools, houses are destroyed. The palace goes, the opera house, the law courts, the library. Food and ammunition dwindle. Malta produces only 30% of her food. Supply from the sea is imperative. But the Allied convoys have their singular hell to endure. The island's population is reduced to one hot meal a day served at a so-called victory kitchen. No utensils to eat with. People use any receptacles they have, fill them with a watery, meat-speckled soup, and carry them home. CBS News correspondent Alexander Kendrick gets the story from Malta's rationing boss, Sir Andrew Cohen.
One had a small loaf of bread. So I can't remember exactly how much it weighed, but it was this sort of size. Every day, that was one's basic food. And then one had a bit of meat once a month, and a bit of bully beef either once or twice a month. And one had some tinned fish and a few other things. Of course, you could get vegetables locally. You occasionally get a bit of meat or fish locally. But it was pretty short.
Kendrick talks to the Lieutenant Governor of Malta during that period, Sir Edward Jackson.
Sir Edward, what was the darkest time, the worst hour, really, of Malta during the siege?
Well, I should say it was about April 42. The rations had got down to pretty well the lowest at that time, and people had been enduring very short rations, far shorter than anyone could maintain ordinary health on, for months. And we estimated the time that we could last according to the amount of flour that we had. And at that time, as far as I remember, we worked out that we could last about a fortnight. Now, people got depressed at that time, and a sort of quiet came over the island. It became a case of resistance to bombing and the destruction of their houses and the casualties that there were. And as I say, I think the Maltese could not have behaved better. There wasn't a single act of sabotage on their part of the whole time that I was there. And they never said, this isn't our war. Why we got to put up with all this? Why don't you surrender and let us have peace again? Never. Quite the contrary. You know how people in those parts are accustomed to write on the walls something that they feel very strongly about. And they never said, English, go home, or anything like that. The only thing I ever saw written up on the walls was bomb Rome.
The Luftwaffe makes the hope of bombing Rome an impossible dream. By 1942, the German professionals have fully replaced the inept Italians in leading the attack on Malta. The enemy's plan is to hammer Malta continuously, and this they do. 400 sorties against the island in one day, over 5,000 in 1 month. Malta's past helped secure her future. Many centuries ago, Maltese Capuchin monks had dug out of the limestone rock vast underground catacombs for burial vaults. When war comes, these ancient caves are gradually reopened and new ones built. Malta fights for her life in April of 42. It is the darkest period of the siege. 10,000 buildings destroyed or damaged. In 2.5 weeks, 170 hours under air raid alerts. Schools stay open in the open, except during the worst of the bombing. The courage of their elders is communicated to the children. The children of Malta have a prayer. They ask the Virgin Mary to spread her mantle over Malta, catch the bombs in it, and throw them into the sea. Ever since 61 AD, when St. Paul converted the Roman governor to Christianity, the Maltese have been militantly religious, devoutly Catholic. The Archbishop of Malta, the Most Reverend Michael Ganzi.
What kept the Maltese and encouraged them was their religion. During the vast majority of the Maltese are very religious. And during the war, that religious spirit was intensified. And our churches, where possible, were packed. And I think that was the only reason that kept the Maltese united as one man and encouraged to continue to suffer for the salvation of Malta.
August 1942, a vast Allied armada, 14 merchantmen guarded by a powerful naval escort, sets out from Scotland. Unless this convoy reaches Malta by mid-month, the Germans will starve the island into surrender. Axis bombers move into the attack. Packs of U-boats and E-boats also are ready as the convoy reaches the Sicilian Narrows only 250 miles from Malta. Within an hour, the convoy is shattered. When the attack is over, only 5 of the original 14 supply ships are left. But these 5 ships will get through. British-manned American tanker Ohio, hit 6 times and set on fire, limps into Grand Harbor carrying desperately needed fuel. After being unloaded, she will sink in the harbor. The remnants of the convoy bring enough supplies and ammunition to meet the island's needs for a good 2 months. It no longer seems inevitable that Malta will crack. Two months later, the Luftwaffe returns to Malta. But now Malta, resupplied, rearmed, reinvigorated, is ready. The Germans' failure to subjugate Malta is a major Axis defeat. Malta's proudest moment comes in the midst of its triumphs. A great public ceremony is held. Members of the 3 fighting services receive awards for individual heroism. Climaxing the ceremony is an extraordinary presentation. Never before has such an award been made, an award for collective heroism. From His Majesty King George VI, there is handed to the islanders by the Governor, Viscount Gort, the George Cross. The award is heralded by a message from the King. To honor her brave people, I award the George Cross to the island fortress of Malta, to bear witness to a heroism and devotion that will long be famous in history. In June of '43, King George comes to salute the people who have repelled the brutal siege. In the words of Franklin D. Roosevelt, Malta's bright story of human fortitude and courage will be read by posterity with wonder and gratitude through all the ages. What was done in this island maintains the highest traditions of gallant men and women who from the beginning of time have lived and died to preserve civilization for all mankind. In our next chapter of this CBS video library of World War II, we focus on events in Central Europe. Czechoslovakia, a model democracy, was an early victim of Nazi aggression. In 1938, in an effort to appease Hitler and stave off the threat of war, England, France, and Italy signed over large chunks of the Czech nation to Germany. What Hitler did not get at Munich,
he took soon after.
Czechoslovakia, March 15th, 1939. Nazi Germany, which took a slice of Czechoslovakia at Munich, now takes the rest, and Adolf Hitler and his jackboots are in Prague. Said Bismarck in 1866, whoever is master of Bohemia is master of Europe. Hitler has Bohemia. He's about to launch World War II for Europe. And Czechoslovakia, land of John Huss and Thomas G. Masaryk, is dead. Into the Nazi war machine now pour the riches of this highly industrialized, hard-working state. Munitions from Skoda in Pilsen, steel from Ostrava, timber from Slovakia, textiles, coal, lignite, iron ore. They flow to Germany, and soon from Germany to the battlefields of France, the skies over Britain, and the steppes of Russia. Political power is seized by the Nazis and by their puppets. German protector Konstantin von Neurath, Czech President Emil Haha, later Czech Prime Minister Jaroslav Krejci. The real leader of the country, President Eduard Beneš, resigned and fled to London 5 days after Munich. Monsignor Josef Tiso is the puppet in Slovakia. Most feared by the Czechs is State Secretary Karl Hermann Frank, a Sudeten German and Nazi sadist. It is Frank who sends 250,000 Czechs to Terezin, Buchenwald, Dachau, the concentration camps. In September of 1941, von Neurath, considered too soft by some Nazis, is replaced by Himmler's right-hand man, Reinhard Heydrich, the hangman of Europe. A wave of terror and murder sweeps Czechoslovakia. In May 1942, 2 free Czech parachutists flown from London assassinate Heydrich. The Nazi answer is to wipe out an entire village suspected of harboring the assassins. Lidice. 500 persons once lived here. All men were killed, all women were sent to concentration camps. All children disappeared. The Nazis ruthlessly seek to mold the little country in their own image. All universities are closed. Trade unions are broken, then unified into a Nazi pattern. Anti-Semitic laws, the Nazi judicial system, are introduced. In December of 1943, the Czechs learn that Beneš in Moscow has signed a 20-year treaty of alliance with the Soviets. Many believe the West betrayed them at Munich. They welcome the news with pro-Soviet signs. In spite of iron Nazi rule, a major rising erupts in Slovakia in August 1944. The Slovak army and partisans, using hidden weapons, some OSS supplied, some Russian, score immediate successes. British and American forces prepare plane loads of arms, medicines, and food, ask the Russians for permission to fly them in. Under an oral agreement at Tehran, Czechoslovakia has been placed in the Soviet zone of operation, unknown to the Czechs. The permission never comes, and the Russians, only 80 miles away, do little to help the insurgents. After 2 bitter months, the revolt is crushed with murderous losses. On October 18th, 1944, the Soviet army crosses into Czechoslovakia. Instead of liberating, it annexes, through threats and subversion, the easternmost province of Ruthenia for the Soviet Union. Alarmed, Beneš arrives in Moscow in March 1945 to set up a provisional government. Czech communists who have spent the war in Moscow demand and get 8 of 23 posts in his new cabinet, although they made up only 10% of the pre-war parliament. On April 4th, with President Beneš virtually isolated, the provisional government is established at Košice in liberated Slovakia. 2 powerful figures are Premier Zdeněk Fierlinger, a pro-communist social democrat, and communist boss Vice Premier Klement Gottwald. In the West, a momentous event is taking place. The American First Army and Patton's Third slice into Czechoslovakia. Thank God, Beneš cries when he hears the news. He sends Patton a telegram of congratulations and awaits the answer to the vital question, who will liberate Prague? The capital seized after 7 years of oppression. In a bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler is dead. The Americans are only 90 miles to the west of Prague, the Russians about twice that distance to the east. 2 Nazi divisions and an SS detachment are in Prague, but the fuse has been lighted. The people explode in revolt. The fighting will rage in Prague for 5 days, but now the end of tyranny seems in sight. Freedom seems near, and a Slavic song bursts from the hearts of the embattled Czechs. To the west, the American 3rd smashes into Pilsen. By May 6, 1945, the town will be theirs. Prague is 56 miles away. With Patton fully able to advance from Pilsen to Prague, the tactical situation is this. Czechoslovakia is being invaded on 3 sides. Americans from the west, Russians from the east and north. The Russians are 120 miles from Prague. The Americans are less than 60. The Soviets, with the Tehran Agreement firmly in mind, request that the Americans not cross this line. It will cause troop confusions. After an exchange of messages between Eisenhower and the Soviet commander, the Russians sweep on toward Prague, and Patton is reluctantly held in Pilsen. In Prague, the battle continues. The principal enemy are Nazi SS men. Patriots take over the radio station and broadcast appeals for help from the Americans, the British, the Russians. Students fight side by side with army officers. Banish supporters with communists. One of the most active communists is Josef Smirkovsky. In 3 years, he will be a leader in the communist coup. In 6 years, he will be purged by the communists. But on this day, the common enemy is a Nazi. The German army surrenders to the Czech National Committee on May 8, 1945. SS fanatics using tanks and artillery continue to fire, but the battle has been won. The next day, the Russians enter Prague. Signs quickly appear proclaiming they came just in time, although the Germans have surrendered the day before. As Nazi prisoners and collaborators begin to clean up the city, the enthusiasm for the Soviet army abruptly ends. Accounts of Russian pillaging and rape, accounts which have followed the Russians across Czechoslovakia, spread throughout the city. On May 16th, after an absence of almost 7 years, President Edward Beneš returns to Prague.
After 2 months of travels across 3 continents, after 6.5 years of struggle for freedom, my journey came to an end. And I shall never forget the warm welcome which I received from my people, in which even their terrible suffering under the German yoke did not succeed in breaking.
Is Beneš right, or has 7 years of Nazi oppression so eroded democracy and Czech love of liberty that his beloved country will not easily be reborn?
But history proved Edward Beneš wrong. At the Tehran Conference, attended by the Allied powers before the end of the war, it had been decided, but unknown to the Czechs at the time, that Czechoslovakia was to be in the Soviet sphere. Within 2 years of the close of the war, reborn Czech independence was dead at the hands of the communists. Czechoslovakia became the 7th Eastern European state to fall behind the Iron Curtain. Our survey of the many wars within a war that were waged across Europe brings us now to Greece. There, guerrilla forces fought against the harsh Nazi occupiers, but they also fought against each other. Our story begins in the spring of 1941.
April 6, 1941. It is 0 hour in Greece. This poor but proud land bars the way to the oil-rich Middle East. Hitler hurls his Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht at Britain's only fighting ally. The Greeks are already at war with Italy, whom they have stopped cold. Now Hitler must rescue his Axis partner if he is to salvage his master plan to secure the Mediterranean. The diversion of German divisions, plus an early winter, will fatally upset his schedule to attack Russia and take Moscow by autumn. Blitzkrieg in full flower crushes Greece. The British must withdraw. The Greek king flees. The German victory is total and terrible. John Regos, Greek journalist, remembers it.
I was 16 years old when this country was occupied by the Germans. I remember the day that the German troops entered into Athens. It was a sunny day. The German troops moved in. It was a silent day for us, a gloomy day. We didn't know what to expect after that, but we knew one thing, that we had lost our freedom.
The master race does not include Greeks. Nazi policy becomes extermination by starvation. They strip the country of its wealth, machines, food. With transport disrupted and destroyed, the little food hoarded in the Greek hills cannot reach the cities. Famine kills 450,000 Greeks in the terrible winter of 1941-42. Many of these scenes were shot secretly in Athens during that period. United Press International Bureau Chief George Androulidakis lived through this.
Occupation meant for Greece first starvation. When I say starvation, it was real starvation. Starvation was the picture of every day in the street, running up into people whom you thought were in an absolutely good condition. They're even fat. You thought they were fat. They were swollen from lack of vitamins, and all of a sudden they would crumble down, and a cart would pick them up and take them away to this nearest cemetery to bury them. At that time, the surrounding of Athens was full of people trying to gather wild greens and take them home for the dinner. The spectacle, particularly of little children, slimmed to bones, was simply awful. Well, another characteristic of the occupation was the cruelty of the occupying forces, especially of the Germans. I'm not exaggerating if I say that they were behaving like beasts. I saw myself in a German non-commissioned officer canteen, little kids of, say, between 6 and 12 years going around stretching their hand to beg a little bit of bread or something like that. One German got so angry that she ran out of the hotel, get the kid's arm, push it against his knee, and broke it in two. A real and genuine desire of defending the country against foreign invasion brought about a real and energetic unity among the Greeks. They forgot all about their rivalries, and they joined in one soul to defend their country. And that's where the so-called Greek miracle came from. They kept the fighting spirit and started resisting against the invaders.
A bearded communist, Aris Spelukiotis, dominates Eam Elas, largest of the many resistance groups, although General Serapis, a Republican, is its field commander. The British send arms to this and other groups. Another resistance organization was ADES, under General Servas. General Kosindus was a member.
Greek resistance offered considerable service to the Allies. The Greek people, despite violence and the enforcement measures by the aggressors, despite the camps, concentration camps, and mass executions, resisted to all of this violence. And with its strength, its moral force, was able to strike hard at the aggressors. The guerrillas of Ades and Elas resisted in the mountains. They struck German military installations. They blew up bridges, including in 1943, the important one at Gorgopotamu. This determined resistance forced the Germans to bring in troops from other fronts, and the Germans could not meet their military requirements to occupy North Africa or to strike Soviet Russia at the time they had planned.
The summer of 1943 is the beginning of the end for Nazis everywhere, and no less in Greece. Guerrilla attacks help to contain German forces there while the Allies land in Sicily. The cost is high, but the reward is in sight. Nothing less than liberation from the hated invader. A year after Sicily, a German soldier comes to the Acropolis to remove the doomed Nazi flag. Now the Russians are in Bulgaria. 2 Allied armies are in northern Italy. The pressure is too great. The Germans withdraw from Greece. In October of 1944, British paratroopers drop into Greece. 3 years before, a German airborne army drove the British from Crete. The British now are met by a happy people, and the country rings with freedom. Yet there are undertones of chaos, social, economic, and above all, political chaos. Guerrilla bands fought the Germans, but they also fought each other. Eam Elas especially is guilty. It has exterminated other resistance groups in order to dominate. Meanwhile, hate explodes against Nazi collaborators, an estimated 25% of the population. Later, collaborators will join in right-wing ranks and take their vengeance on their accusers. Greece will be split in two by passion, a left, a right, and almost no middle ground. The economic chaos grows with each mile of the Germans' retreat. The Nazis create a masterpiece of methodical, vengeful destruction. They make a particular point of blocking the Corinth Canal. This waterway across the Greek peninsula is vital to Greek recovery. When the Nazis are done, it will take 4 years to reopen it. October 16th, 1944, the sick and weary Athenians still have strength for a warm welcome to the British. Britain, returning to a friendly country whose liberation she has guaranteed, actually sends only a handful of combat troops. Most are service troops, for the return to Greece is called Operation Manna, and the main objective is relief for the hungry population. The black market flourishes. A 2-pound loaf of bread costs 40 cents, a half day's pay for an average workman. Monetary inflation is an even greater evil. That 40 cents now equals 2 million paper drachmas. Later it will be 45 billion drachmas, money without meaning. When the Eam Elas comes down from the mountains, the return of the king is a burning question. The British pledged to support a provisional government until a plebiscite is held to choose between a republic or a monarchy. The government tells the guerrillas, disarm, disband. Eam Elas refuses. Then Athens, December 2nd, 1944.
Hello, BBC. This is John Nixon speaking from Athens. Eam, the left-wing party, called for demonstrations today, and the authorities banned them. Grey uniformed police drew a cordon round Athens' main square to prevent demonstrators entering it, and I saw British armoured cars standing by. And just before 11 o'clock, a procession appeared in the distance, marching towards the square. They were shouting slogans and carrying banners of the left parties and big flags of Greece, Britain, Russia, and the United States. When the head of the procession was level with the unknown warrior's tomb, which overlooks one side of the main square, the police opened fire. Several demonstrators fell, but the rest continued to march forward, still shouting their cries, their banners streaming in the breeze. There was another burst of firing, including machine gun fire, and the procession scattered. As far as I could see, the demonstrators were not armed. General Scobie, the British Commander-in-Chief, announced a short time ago that no British troops were involved in today's incidents.
The Athens Revolution has begun. In a short time, Eam Elas has most of Greece terrorized. In Athens, the British seize stores of hidden weapons. They round up, identify, and interrogate suspected rebels. Events indicate that the Reds are liquidating political opponents throughout the country. The small force of British combat troops is isolated, literally surrounded by the rebels in downtown Athens. The arrival of Field Marshal Sir Harold Alexander, commander of Allied forces in the Mediterranean, signals that this is no longer a local affair. The alert British know that a communist Greece means a strategic Soviet strongpoint aimed at the Middle East. They reinforce their garrison. Fires burn in the suburbs of Athens. Spitfires, which formerly fought the Germans, strafe and bomb the rebels, while below, the rebels industriously kill off the members of Edes, the monarchist supporters. Greece has now fought an invader. Then faction has killed faction. Now Greek fights loyal ally. The tragedy continues, reaching even to the ancient Acropolis, the cradle of democracy itself. Now it is almost Christmas, but it is a time of fear, hate, passion, and sudden death. Athens, late 1944. Anthony Eden, Harold Macmillan meet with American, French, and Soviet allies called together by Winston Churchill for peace talks with rebels and George Papandreou, Greek premier.
Hello, BBC. This is John Nixon speaking from Athens. The city pauses in its misery at the news that Mr. Churchill has come all the way from England in the depths of winter to try and help the Greeks solve their problems. An uncomfortable and dangerous journey for anyone, let alone a man of 70. Then they find 3/4 of a ton of dynamite in a sewer, put there by men who crept under the city while it slept to wreck the hotel where Greek political and British military leaders are staying, and where Mr. Churchill himself might have stayed.
The conference promises peace. Archbishop Damaskinos becomes regent. The king will remain outside Greece unless recalled by a plebiscite. Later, General Plastiras, a Republican, replaces Monarchos Papandreou as premier. Hostilities gradually cease and a peaceful, if vigorous, political life resumes. In the spring of 1946, campaigns for the first post-war national elections are in full swing. The Greeks throng to the polls, which are observed by an Allied mission. The communists, however, abstain from voting, then call the election unfair when the right wing wins. That September, when the plebiscite is held, Eam Elas campaigns for a republic, but the Greeks distrust the organization responsible for the murder of more than 8,000 fellow Greeks. King George II is recalled. The streets are gay, there is rejoicing, but the 0 hour in Greece still has not passed. Danger clouds still hang beyond Olympus, and the tragedy has still another act to play. The Greek king will have a short and troubled reign.
What followed in Greece was 2 years of a bitter and bloody civil war involving an attempted takeover by the communist forces, and then major American involvement, primarily financial, through what came to be known as the Truman Doctrine. Greece was the only Balkan nation to remain free in the aftermath of World War II. Next, the little-known story of a Red Army general, Andrei Andreevich Vlasov, who was captured by the Germans, denounced Stalin and Bolshevism, and became the symbolic leader of the greatest mass defection in military history. He led the Army of the Damned.
Winter 1941. Hitler has attacked Russia. Since June, his armies have smashed through horde after horde of Russians until the Nazis are nearly in Moscow. But Russian soldier and Russian winter perform a miracle. Moscow is saved, and the Soviet press hails the loyal generals who saved the city. The youngest of them has been a Red soldier since early youth. He is 42-year-old Andrei Andreevich Vlasov. Vlasov will fight another Red battle before fate changes the entire course of his life. Northwest of Moscow, Leningrad is besieged, battered on 3 sides by German guns. Inside the city, 3 million Russians are trapped, enduring hunger and bitter cold. Vlasov will come here to command a shock army, with Stalin's praise as a savior of Moscow still in his ears. The young Red general flies to Leningrad to join his new command outside the city. A Russian who was there reports Vlasov's words to his men. "We fight to save our fatherland. Leningrad must be saved." When Vlasov joins it, his army already is surrounded. It smashes through the encirclement under brutal German gunfire. But the Russians are caught again, break out, are caught, and eventually are surrounded for the last time. They hold out for 3 months, but their position is hopeless. The army is written off by Moscow, abandoned by Stalin, and its soldiers become potential recruits for the Army of the Damned. Vlasov's troops join almost 4 million other Russian prisoners taken by the Germans in the first year of the war. And among the prisoners is General Vlasov himself. He is held in Vinitsa in the German-occupied Ukraine, where he broods over his lost army and struggles with doubts about the Stalinist regime. He is now aware that all Russian prisoners are not in German prisons. Many are in German uniforms as volunteers. From the Cossacks of the Don, even from Stalin's home state, the Georgian Republic. All willing recruits encouraged by German generals like Ernst Kestrin. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda boss, is in on the act, painting Germany's war of conquest as a crusade against Bolshevism. Even he is surprised at his success when 700,000 Russians joined the German side in the early months of the war. This is the beginning of the largest military defection in history. Now Vlasov is heard from his prison. He has met with other high-ranking prisoners, and he writes a bitter, open letter to all Russians. It denounces Stalin for betraying the Russian Revolution and bringing disaster to Russia. Certain Germans see his usefulness, among them Reinhard Gehlen, Eastern Intelligence Chief, and Field Marshal von Kluge. Also interested are anti-Hitler Germans like Klaus von Stauffenberg and the ex-ambassador to Moscow, Werner von der Schulenburg. Both will die for plotting against Hitler. Vlasov, free after many weeks of captivity, confers with other defectors in Berlin. His prominence as a savior of Moscow and his open letter give him leadership of a paper army of Russian liberation. Nevertheless, the Germans have promised Vlasov a real army, and he seeks it in the bulging prisoner of war camps. Moving through German-occupied parts of Russia, Vlasov promises the people a free, democratic government when Stalin is overthrown. He is welcomed everywhere. One of those who heard him and followed him is former Red Army Captain Michael Shatov.
At the beginning of 1943, we met General Vlasov for the first time. He came to the Russian territory now occupied by the Germans. He visited towns and villages. He spoke of the difficult moments the Russian people had lived through. He spoke of the reasons which had made him decide to start fighting the Bolsheviks. All this was like a spark to our feelings. We understood General Vlasov. Each and every one of us wanted to join him, to fight under him.
But to arch-Nazis and race fanatics like Himmler, the Russians cannot be German soldiers. To him, they are Slavic Untermenschen, subhumans. Learning that the army welcomes the Vlasovites as fighting allies, he protests indignantly to Hitler. The generals have not told Hitler of the plans, and he is furious. They are hypnotized by their own propaganda, he says. Never, he adds, will we build a Russian army. Vlasov is placed under house arrest. He tells his staff Hitler has forbidden further enlistment of Russian volunteers. The 1 million already serving with Wehrmacht units will stay under German control. Vlasov secretly vows to work in defiance of Hitler for an independent force to fight Stalin.
Hitler was cleverer than all the others, than his generals who insisted on supporting this movement. He felt sooner or later the Russians would defend their own interests, that they are, after all, nationalists by blood, by origin, and they would surely defend only the interests of the Russian people, not of Germany. And, of course, the hope of the generals was stupid, as well as the dream of all those who thought that by giving arms to Vlasov, they would get him to fight for Hitlerite Germany. Hitler was right.
To neutralize the Russian volunteer force, Hitler moves 360 of its battalions west, scattering them through Italy and France. A proclamation forged in Vlasov's name tells the volunteers they are going west to fight communism. Many just fade away into the French Maquis to fight Germans instead. It is now 1943. The Germans also are moving west in retreat from the resurgent Red Army. The Nazis are haunted by one of Vlasov's own slogans. Russia, he has often told the Germans, can only be conquered by Russians. It is 1944. The Third Reich begins to crumble. Red troops return to their homelands, learn more and more of Nazi atrocities, become more and more united by hatred of Hitler. And for Andrei Vlasov, a reckoning is also looming. A defector from Stalin, he still may only pray for Russian freedom, not fight for it. Figurehead general of a phantom army, he may only dandle children of Russian laborers in Germany on his knee. Those who believe in him, both soldier and civilian, are demoralized. The vengeful Red Army creeps ever closer. Then a dramatic blow is struck at Hitler from inside Germany, which will affect Vlasov's future. On July 20th, 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg plants a bomb in the Fuhrer's conference room. It fails to kill Hitler, but shakes the right. Von Stauffenberg and von der Schulenburg, both of them Vlasov supporters, and many others, are executed. Vlasov's stock should now be lower than ever, but the plot unleashes Nazi desperation. Defeat everywhere dictates a reversal of policy. November 1944. Vlasov goes to Prague, Czechoslovakia, chosen because it is the last Slavic capital in German hands. He proclaims a fight for Russian freedom. Even though it is evident Germany has lost the war, 60,000 anti-Stalin Russians enlist with Vlasov in a single day. The first units of the Vlasovite army form in Germany that winter. They wear uniforms stripped of German insignia and are equipped with captured Soviet rifles, tanks, and artillery. In early March 1945, the 1st Vlasov Division, an all-Russian unit, moves to the Oder River to fight. Vlasov and his army of the damned will at last face Stalin's Red Army. The Vlasovites hold a swamp in which the Germans already have suffered a bloodbath. The Vlasovites begin to suspect they have been sent here not to fight, merely to die. Across the Oder, Red guns are zeroed in on every foot of their ground. It is too much. After heavy casualties, Vlasov orders his men to stop dying in Hitler's lost battles. Defying German orders to stay, the Vlasovites pull out, going south. Vlasov now has a freelance army in a crumbling world moving toward Prague. Revolt breaks out in Prague, but 2 heavily armed SS divisions hold the city. The Czechs seize a radio station, appeal to the Red Army. Just as in Warsaw, when the underground revolted, Red help doesn't come. Fearful of a similar SS slaughter, the Czechs appeal to Vlasov. He orders his 1st Division to help the Czechs against the Germans. The advance toward Prague is led by Colonel Andrew Arkhipov.
Never in all my life, after having fought in 3 wars, had I witnessed such a triumphal march as the one made by the 1st Division toward Prague. The whole road was strewn with flowers. The whole population from neighboring villages and towns had gathered to see the 1st Division as it was moving to save Prague. I received the order at 5 o'clock in the morning on May 7th to cross the bridges over the river Moldau, to take Prague and somehow save those who had revolted.
Russian soldiers in German uniforms fighting Germans amaze the Czechs. They also amaze Himmler's SS troops. The lightly armed Czechs had been no match for Nazi tanks and machine guns. But with Vlasovite aid, the Czechs are saved from a massacre. After a day of battle, the Nazis are vanquished. Vlasov has been a savior of Moscow. Now his anti-Red Army is the liberator of Prague. The Vlasovite victory, however, is brief. The approaching Red Army now brings danger. In the confusion, an American patrol arrives. Colonel Arkhipov.
Talking to those Americans who were officers, veterinarians, it became clear that they also didn't know what was happening. They thought we were Reds, the Soviet army, and so on. But then after we explained things to them, they said, well, now everything is changed in Russia, and since you have been here fighting, why, Stalin will probably be glad to take you back. Late on May 11th, we stood between the Red tanks and the Americans, to whom we surrendered our weapons, but who had not let us through the lines. The Reds waited while the Americans decided what to do with us. The decision of the American command, which was expected at 10 in the morning, would seal the fate of our division. On May the 12th, early in the morning, we received orders from the American command to cross the advanced American lines. We crossed the advanced American lines. They let us through, about 2 kilometers deep. And it was only now that the Reds caught on. Had they known before that we were disarmed, the Red Army would never have asked permission of the Americans. They would simply have attacked us and wiped us out right there. Here, on May 12th, at 1 in the afternoon, the final order of the American command was received. See here, our Russian friends. You have surrendered your weapons. So now, just scatter.
Vlasov himself has been seized by the Soviet Army. 15 months later, in August 1946, a brief notice appears in his Vestia, which once hailed him as a savior of Moscow. Andrei Andreevich Vlasov has been hanged. He is called a traitor to the fatherland he once defended. Vlasov's army, however, still has one long march to make. Thousands like Shatov and Arkhipov manage to disappear into the wide, free world. Others, not so fortunate, cling together in what they believe is the safety of Allied internment camps. These Russians do not yet understand that the Western Allies have agreed at Yalta early in 1945 to return all Soviet citizens found in their occupation zones to Russia. When they do understand, they are bewildered, and bewilderment turns to fear, for many of them know only too well that their bid for freedom has made them wartime traitors to communism and to Stalin. They fear that the road ahead leads to Stalinist terror, to exile in the snows of Siberia, to torture, and to death. Many believe their fate only when they see the red star on the boxcar. Many try suicide, many succeed, rather than return to the home where there is no home. This is the last long journey for the Army of the Damned.